The first skeleton was pulled from the earth, and people swore it had wings. Not imagined wings. Not symbolic wings. Real ones spread wide in the dust, carved into bone older than memory itself. Villagers didn't call it a fossil. They didn't have that word. They called it what it looked like. A dragon. And that moment standing over something ancient, massive, and impossible is where the legend truly begins. Because dragons were never just a story. They were a misunderstanding, one so powerful that it rewrote human imagination across continents. Long before science gave names to extinction and evolution, the world was filled with things people could not explain. Bones emerged from mountainsides after storms. Entire skeletons lay buried beneath deserts. Skulls the size of shields stared up from the ground, empty-eyed and silent. To modern science, these are fossils remains of dinosaurs, mammoths, and prehistoric reptiles. But to ancient humans, they were something else entirely. Proof. Proof that monsters had once walked the earth. Historians now believe that many dragon legends began exactly this way through the discovery of fossilized bones that people tried to interpret without any scientific framework. A mammoth skull, with its massive central cavity, was once believed to belong to a terrifying beast. A spiked dinosaur skeleton looked like something out of a nightmare. Even early scholars misidentified these remains, reinforcing the belief that dragons had once existed. And this is where the truth becomes stranger than fiction. Because the people weren't entirely wrong. They were just looking at the wrong time. The creatures they imagined as dragons did exist, but millions of years before humans ever walked the earth. Dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and giant reptiles ruled a world that no human ever saw. Yet their remains survived, buried beneath layers of rock, waiting to be discovered. When those remains resurfaced, they told a story, but an incomplete one. Imagine finding a massive rib cage without context, or a skull with teeth longer than your hand. Without knowledge of extinction, evolution, or deep time, there was only one logical explanation. Something enormous, something dangerous, something alive, had once been here. And so, the dragon was born not as a creature, but as a conclusion. But fossils were only one piece of the puzzle. The world itself was filled with creatures that already looked like fragments of a dragon. Giant snakes moved silently through forests. Crocodiles waited beneath dark water, exploding into motion with terrifying force. And on distant islands, massive lizards grew to lengths of nearly 10 feet, powerful enough to kill large animals and humans. To a human with no scientific knowledge, these were not ordinary animals. They were monsters. Even today, the Komodo dragon carries a name that echoes ancient fear. Sailors who encountered such creatures returned home with stories that grew larger, darker, and more impossible with every telling. A large lizard becomes a giant beast. A dangerous bite becomes poison. A shadow in the sky becomes wings. And eventually, a creature that breathes fire. Fire. The most iconic and impossible trait of dragons. And yet, even this may have roots in reality, not in biology, but in interpretation. Volcanoes erupted violently, spewing molten rock and smoke into the sky. Lightning struck forests, igniting sudden fires. Gas vents hissed from the earth, sometimes igniting in bursts of flame. To ancient observers, these were not natural events. They were signs of something alive. Something beneath the ground. Something breathing. Without science, the earth itself seemed like a living creature, and dragons became the face of that power. Across the world, the idea took different shapes, but the core remained the same. In Europe, dragons became symbols of destruction. Winged, fire-breathing beasts that guarded treasure and terrorized kingdoms. Creatures to be slain by heroes. In Asia, they transformed into something else entirely: serpentine beings tied to water, storms, and balance. Not evil, but powerful. Not enemies, but forces of nature. Two completely different interpretations. One shared idea. That alone is one of the strangest facts of all. Because dragon-like creatures appear in nearly every culture on Earth. Civilizations separated by oceans without communication imagined similar beings. Not identical, but close enough to raise a question that still unsettles historians. Why did humanity, everywhere, imagine the same kind of monster? The answer may lie deep within the human mind itself. Humans are wired to recognize danger, to combine threats, to imagine worst-case scenarios. Take the most feared creatures of the ancient world. Snakes, birds of prey, large predators. Now combine them. Add wings for speed, teeth for killing, size for dominance. What you get is not just a creature. You get the ultimate predator. A dragon is not random. It is a perfect storm of everything humans were designed to fear. And that may be why the idea spread so easily and lasted so long. For centuries, people didn't just imagine dragons. They believed in them. Medieval maps marked unexplored regions with warnings. Stories described encounters. Some even claimed to have seen dragons in distant lands. Without scientific tools, there was no way to disprove these claims. And belief filled the gap where knowledge was missing. It wasn't until the rise of modern science, paleontology, biology, geology, that the illusion began to break. Scientists studied fossils and identified them as extinct species, not mythical beasts. They analyzed anatomy and concluded that fire-breathing creatures were biologically impossible. They mapped the Earth and found no hidden populations of giant flying reptiles. Slowly, the dragon was pushed out of reality and into legend. But here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn. Because even after being proven false, dragons refused to disappear. They survived. Not in forests, not in mountains, but in human culture. Books, films, symbols, flags. Dragons are still everywhere. Not as animals, but as ideas. And that raises a deeper, more unsettling thought. If dragons were never real, why do they feel real? Why do they appear in dreams, stories, and imagination with such clarity? Why does the human mind return to them again and again across centuries? Some researchers believe dragons represent something deeper than fear. Not just monsters but memory. Not memory of dragons themselves, but of something older. A time when humans were smaller, weaker, surrounded by predators, living in constant danger. The dragon may be the final evolution of that fear, a symbolic creature shaped by millions of years of survival instinct. A shadow left behind by evolution. And then there's the final possibility. The one that lingers in the background, rarely spoken but never fully dismissed. What if the myths are not entirely wrong? Not in the way we imagine, but not entirely fiction either. Because history is incomplete. The fossil record is incomplete. Vast areas of our planet remain untouched, especially the deep oceans and remote, uncharted regions where human exploration has barely scratched the surface. In a world like this, it's easy to assume that anything is possible. And yet, despite centuries of searching, no physical evidence of dragons has ever been found. Thousands of years ago, people stood over massive, unfamiliar bones buried in the earth and reached the only conclusion they could: these belong to dragons. Creatures of immense power and mystery. Today, we stand over those same bones, but we call them something else: dinosaurs. The remains haven't changed. The structure, the size, the shape, all identical. The only thing that has changed is the story we tell ourselves. And that realization opens a far more unsettling question than whether dragons were ever real. What if, somewhere in the future, our understanding shifts again? What if something we dismiss today, something we label as myth or imagination, becomes undeniable truth tomorrow? Because the reality of dragons is not simple. They were never real in the way legends describe: no wings blotting out the sky, no fire scorching the earth. But they were never entirely false either. Their origins lie in real bones, real animals, and very real human fear. And that is what makes them far more powerful than any creature. Dragons are an idea, one built from fragments of truth and shaped by the human mind. An idea that has survived for thousands of years, refusing to fade. So maybe the real mystery isn't whether dragons existed. Maybe it's why humanity needed them to, and what we are still trying to explain, without even realizing it. Some truths are buried for a reason. Subscribe before we uncover the next one.